Hello everybody, Maven here, and today we're going over an Osmiomancy Gloves build in a way you've never seen it done before. So the Osmiomancy Gloves grant you a second Coldsnap Grenade charge, and whenever you see a YouTuber talk about this thing, they're like, oh, it gives you a second Stasis Turret. You can throw Stasis Turrets everywhere. But what everyone tends to forget is that this makes your Coldsnap Grenades very powerful as well. It pretty much gives you infinite Coldsnap Grenade charges, and it's pretty ridiculous. Now you can go ahead and use it with the Stasis Turrets if you want, but it's still very powerful and probably even more powerful when you just use it with the Coldsnap Grenades. So in this video, I'm going to show you how that is, and also I'm going to do a full build breakdown, so stay tuned. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoy, and let's get to it. So a piece of text that is worded wrong on the Osmiomancies is that your cold snaps recharge quicker on direct impact. What it really means by recharge quicker is that it fully refunds your grenade. As you saw in the intro clip, I was able to stun lock Carl forever because I was throwing the grenade at him and then it'd fall, hit the ground, and go to his feet and freeze him again, just refunding the grenade charge over and over again. So you can just run through content, chucking cold snaps at enemies non-stop and just freezing everything in your way. It's pretty good. However, if you're in an area where you know you're going to be there for a long time, or you know there's a constant spawn of enemies in that one spot, that is when I would recommend throwing a Bleak Watcher turret. So with this build, I wouldn't take off the Bleak Watcher, I would just use it in different kinds of areas. So this isn't a video to basically dismiss the Bleak Watcher, it's just saying that there's more to the Osmiomancy than people make it out to be. Now because this build is able to freeze things constantly, that is going to make the Whisper of Rending very powerful. It says that primary ammo weapons do increased damage to frozen targets, and that is going to be a 43% damage buff, which is very significant. So just to showcase that off a bit with a few heavy hitting exotic primaries, we're going to freeze lock Carl like we did in the intro and shoot him with 3 bursts of the Devil's Ruin sidearm, and it pretty much 3 burst him. It gets really close and I kind of scuffed it up, could have been a 3 burst. But when you compare that against something like the Guttural Hothead with impact casing and adept big ones, it makes primaries very strong. And another comparison here with the Final Warning sidearm, and we're able to pretty much 2 burst Carl. I did scuff it up a bit again, probably could have 2 bursted him. But when it takes 3 rockets, it's insane that it only takes 1 clip of sidearm ammo to be able to kill Carl. That is ridiculously strong. Whisper of Rendering's nuts. And just as a little bonus, freeze Carl, Hawk Moon him, 160k to the head. So yeah, Whisper of Rending is definitely one of the big benefits of running an Osmiomancy build. Now, typically I recommend against using a primary in Destiny 2 because it is 100% a double special meta, but Whisper of Rendering makes it possible to run a primary without feeling bad about it. So speaking of my weapon options, my primary that I've been having a great time with this build is the Last Breath with Demo and Frenzy. You can farm this from the cube encounter in the Prophecy dungeon, just wait for it to be the rotation. And yeah, I've been tearing it up with this thing. It feels really good with this build. And I would just recommend using demolitionist weapons in general so you can keep your Coldsnap Grenade charges up if you happen to miss one. And another cool thing about having a demolitionist grenade launcher is that because of the amount you can infinitely spam the Osmiomancy Coldsnaps, you can just keep on proccing demo on your GL and just constantly reload it over and over and over again and just keep spamming GL shots. I'll show an example here. So you can just shoot, Coldsnap, shoot, reload, shoot, Coldsnap, shoot, reload, and you can do that infinitely until you run out of GL ammo, so it's good for taking down fatter targets. So having Demolitionist on a primary is a very good thing to have with this build. However, there's another different type of primary that I'd recommend that not many people have good rolls of, but a headstone weapon is very, very solid whenever you are running a stasis build that freezes a lot and makes crystals, and you're running Whisper of Rending, which makes your primary weapons also do more damage to your stasis crystals, so you can one-shot them. I have a setup for this in my loadouts, by the way, I'll put it on right here. So this would be the loadout I'd recommend for a headstone type of build. And so yeah, Whisper of Shards, Whisper of Fissures, so it just increases the size and burst and damage when you destroy Stasis Crystal and makes your grenades regen quicker. So this is another great setup if you have headstone weapons, and so I would highly recommend the Peace Bond. That is a very good one. There is also the Sanuna. The Sanuna is a world drop, so it's like impossible to get, but if you happen to have one, good on ya. But Peace Bond with Subsistence Headstone is a monster for this. This is one I'd recommend the most. If you're doing low-level content, you could get away with the Ias Luna. And if you are doing Grandmasters and you really need range, I would recommend using Percy's D in very high level content. And the reason that I would recommend Cloud Strike here is because when you go and freezing things with your Osmiomancies, that puts them still, so you can easily hit your triple tap shots with your Cloud Strike. Very, very solid thing to do. And so that you can run, you know, Arc Scavenger and whatnot and Arc Reserves, you can just run an Arc Heavy like the Hothead for some burst damage. So this is a very great setup and one I would highly recommend if you have the loot for it. However, if you are doing very, very low level content, strikes and whatnot, quick content, seasonal content, this is a setup I'd recommend as well, which is a Glacial Harvest version. It does not have Bleak Watcher because Bleak Watcher is more for difficult content. So if you're doing easy content, this is a setup where you make stasis shards for freezing targets, in which you're doing constantly. And when you pick up those stasis shards, you are getting Whisper of Rhyme overshields, and you can just breeze through things, just being immortal, basically. We got Whisper of Torment, Whisper of Conduction, so the stasis shards track near you and just feed you overshields, and of course, Whisper of Rending. So that is one setup. And then if you are using a setup like this with the Demolitionist weapons, and you wanted Bleak Watcher doing a little bit tougher content, you don't have Headstone weapons, probably then you can go with a setup like this that just throws on the Bleak Watcher and instead uses Whisper of Refraction as well as Whisper of Fissures. Now, depending on if your Demolitionist grenade launcher is Solar or Void, then if you're using Solar, I would recommend using a Gallarhorn with it, and then you can run Solar Reserves and Solar Scavenger. But if you have a Truth Teller with Demolitionist that you're using, then instead you could use a Two-Tailed Fox, and then you can just throw on Void Reserves and Void Scavenger. So either of these setups works perfectly fine, but I tested out the damage of Two-Tailed Fox, and it still feels like Gallarhorn just does so much more. So this is definitely a setup that I prefer. Now onto our mod setup. Now the setup is going to pretty much be the same for all three of the builds, except for the Reserve and the Scavenger. You know, if you're doing the one with the Cloud Strike and the Hothead, obviously go with Arc Reserves and Arc Scavenger. And just, you know, you can interchange that, and you can interchange your resist mods on your chest depending on what activity you're doing. But we have some ammo finders for both different types. And then of course there is a siphon depending on what element that your special and heavy are. That's interchangeable as well. Grenade Kickstart, obviously, and some people think that Grenade Kickstart doesn't work when you have 2 charges, but yes, it does. Bungie fixed that. It does work. So definitely use Grenade Kickstart and then Momentum Transfer and Bolstering Detonation, because when you're throwing your Cold Snaps at enemies, it's going to just also refund your melee energy and your class ability energy. So spamming Cold Snaps is good for all of your abilities. And then we have Recuperation and Better Already on our boots, so we pick up our teammates' orbs, because we're not really making very many orbs with this build. We get a lot of health regen. That's very important when you're on stasis, because you don't have a lot of ways to stay alive on stasis. And then for our class item here, we have Utility Kickstart, because we're running Bomber and Outreach to refund our melee and grenade energy. So it'd be nice to get a Rift back quicker so that we can get Bomber and Outreach going. And as for our stats, we got 100 Resilience and Discipline. Those are the stats I would highly recommend. And whatever you do in this game, always run a minimum of 3 Intellect. And then after that, invest as much into Recovery as you possibly can, and then put the rest in Strength. But definitely prioritize Discipline followed by Resilience. And one last little bit of information is icing on the cake for this build. When you're using Osmiomancy in high level content, you have Overload at the ready, because when you throw your Bleak Watcher, it freezes those Overload champions or slows them at first, and that will stun them. And then when you Cold Snap and Unstop and shatter them, that stuns unstoppable champions. And keeping a barrier champion frozen with the Bleak Watcher turret constantly is going to prevent them from putting up their barrier. So you pretty much have all 3 champions covered just in this build alone. However, sometimes the barriers will manage to get their barrier up on time, so at that point I would recommend running a barrier weapon, but with this build you really don't need to worry too much about Unstoppable and Overload. So I'll show some more gameplay with the build. Now, I did test a lot of things with Whisper of Rending. Pretty much anything you could think of, I tried it. There's some really good options like the Vex Mythoclast linear mode, because when that takes advantage of the 43% damage buff, it hits very hard. The Teraba is also very good. And, you know, Lucky Pants Hunter can take really good advantage of Whisper of Rendering, especially with like Malfeasance, Crimson, stuff like that. And then there is the Osteostriga on the Thorn because they do poison damage, and that damage over time, even while they're frozen, that DOT damage is getting buffed by the Whisper of Rending, so that's pretty strong. And Thorn is really good right now too because it just got that 20% damage buff from the recent patch. And Revision 0 also got a massive buff, and it's in a similar vein to the Vex Mythic class where it can turn into a sniper, whereas the Vex turns into a linear. So yeah, there's a lot of setups for this Osmiomancy build. You can use whatever weapons you want, just as long as you have the general build. The weapons are really up to you. You can use whatever you like. And just use that last setup that I showed right before cutting to this gameplay. That's the setup you want if you want to just use whatever weapons. And you can really try to mess around with Whisper of Rending and take better advantage of it. But something that you really got to try out though is the Cloud Strike. It's really good against those frozen enemies, I'm telling you. It's just a free triple tap. It's very ammo efficient now after the buff, and it's getting even stronger next season in a couple days when it gets that 10% damage buff in PvE. So it's going to get even better. And I like how this kind of turned into just a full-fledged Osmiomancy build video when the point of the video was really supposed to be you can also throw Coldsnap Grenades. You don't have to always throw Bleak Watchers because the Coldsnap charges are infinite. So that is the moral of the story, the moral of the video. It's done. Anyways, as always, I'll leave the dim loadout link to this build down below in the description and the pinned comment if you'd like to give it a try. And just as a little heads up for our next video when Season of the Deep launches in a couple days, we will be reviewing all of the overhauled exotic armor pieces and exotic weapons to see how they are after their changes. So stay tuned for that. Make sure to subscribe if you're new so you don't miss out on that. And I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to hit the like button and drop a comment because interacting with the video in different types of ways like that really helps it out and helps the algorithm. And with that, I will catch you in the next video. See you later.